Let me get to what happened, though, in the gold market. And, gold hit 3,600 today for the first time ever. Price of gold was up 4% on the week. It's now up 37% on the year. 37% for the price of gold. Now, I've been doing my best to get my audience to buy gold, buy silver. Silver was only up 2.8% on the week. I say only. That's still a big week. Silver closed the week just about $41 or just over $41. Gold didn't hold 3,600. It closed, I think, around 3,590-ish. Traders tend to look at these round numbers and take profits. I wouldn't be surprised if on Monday morning, when the U.S. resumes trading, we gap up in the price of gold well beyond 3,600, which is why you shouldn't wait till Monday to buy your gold. In fact, don't even wait till the end of this podcast. If you are listening to me or watching this on YouTube, pause. Just press pause. Don't worry. I'll still be here. Just pause it. Then go to Schiff Gold and buy some gold right now and buy some silver. Don't wait. Don't wait for me to finish the podcast. This is too important. Put it on pause. Go buy some gold and silver at schiffgold.com. And when you're finished buying it, then come back and watch the rest of the podcast. That's how important it is, right? I want to make sure that people get aboard this train, right? Unlike the Trump train that's going to end in a wreck, this one has got a long way to go. Again, 41% year-to-date gains in gold. Look at the gold mining stocks. The GDX has now officially doubled on the year. So basically, we're through 8 months of the year, right? And we've had a doubling of the GDX. Double. I remember in April, I put out the special report, the best way to buy gold. And I was, practically begging my gold customers not to buy gold because I said, you take that money and buy these gold stocks because I'd never seen them this cheap in my life relative to the price of gold. So I said below ground gold was such a bargain, you have to buy it rather than the above ground variety. But I also saw the greatest combination of fundamentals that I'd ever seen for the price of gold. And I expect an explosion. Last year was the breakout, 2024, when gold broke above 2,000 and moved up above 3,000. But I think this move is going to mirror, at a minimum, the move from 2001 to 2011. Where the price of gold was up sixfold. So if you take sixfold from 2,000, that's $12,000 gold, right? We're barely a third of the way to 12,000 or a fourth of the way to $12,000 gold right now. We are so much closer to the bottom than we are the top. Yeah, I really wanted you guys to buy closer to 2,000, but I don't care. You got to buy it now. Same thing with silver. I was telling everybody 30 was the floor. You got to buy $30 silver. There was minimal downside risk. We barely ever went below it after I said that. And now we're buying $40 silver, $41 silver. The problem is, and I've talked to the guys at Schiff Gold, and I've talked to people I know at other gold companies where sales are slow. People just don't want to buy the high. Well, you know what? You got to get used to buying the high. If you don't buy the high, you're not buying gold and silver. You got to buy the high because we're going higher. And the longer you wait to buy the high, the higher the high you're going to buy. So you might as well buy it now, because if you wait, you're just going to pay a higher price. That doesn't mean you're never going to get a down day or a down week, but it's not worth waiting. You got to just read the writing on the wall here and recognize the historic nature of what is going on. In fact, even Bukele of El Salvador, right, the Bitcoin guy, just announced that he bought $50 million worth of gold for El Salvador, right? He was poo-pooing gold a few years ago when he was buying Bitcoin. Now, instead of buying more Bitcoin, he bought $50 million worth of gold. Congratulations. I'm glad to see that. Now, if he could just sell his Bitcoin and buy even more gold, that would even be a better deal. By the way, Bitcoin was barely up today, in the face of a big move up in gold. In fact, year to date, Bitcoin is only up about 18%. I mean, that's not bad, 18%, but gold's up 37%. Bitcoin's supposed to be up a lot more than gold. It's supposed to be a turbocharged version. supposed to be gold on steroids, right? But it's only up. And it could easily finish the year negative. But the more important statistic on Bitcoin, again, Bitcoin is 15% lower today than it was at its peak priced in gold in 2021. That's almost 4 years ago. 4 years of 15% decline. We're almost in a bear market in the gold price of Bitcoin. This, despite all the Bitcoin ETFs buying up all this Bitcoin. They didn't exist 4 years ago, right? The NFT craze hadn't hit yet. All the Super Bowl ads, all the celebrity endorsements. We didn't have all these Bitcoin treasury companies. MicroStrategy hadn't loaded up on all this Bitcoin, tens of billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, and now all the copycat Bitcoin treasury companies didn't exist. We didn't have the Bitcoin president, right? We didn't have the strategic Bitcoin reserve. We didn't have a Bitcoin czar, right? So none of this existed 4 years ago, right? Yet despite all this, Bitcoin is down 15% against gold. And these hodlers are oblivious to all of this. They just look back to the very beginning of Bitcoin and talk about how much it's up. And they don't look at what's been happening over the last 4 years and question why, right? Gold has this huge move. It's doing exactly what you would expect it to do in the face of a Fed that's about to ease into rising inflation. But why isn't Bitcoin doing that? Why is Bitcoin behaving differently? Why is it following risk assets and not gold if it's digital gold? But people are so wedded to this cult that they don't even bother to question their own beliefs. They just assume as long as they hodl forever, they'll make it to the promised land, right? They've believed the Messiah. They just got to have faith, and they have to ignore all of the other realities that would cast doubt. But I don't know why Bukele decided to buy some gold. Maybe he's starting to lose a little confidence because he obviously could have bought more Bitcoin, but he didn't do that. So good for him, right? For coming over to the right side. But I think the biggest thing, and I'm going to make this point right now, I think the biggest threat now to the dollar, and one of the reasons that I think the price of gold could go ballistic, is because I think there is a good chance that the Supreme Court is going to side with Donald Trump in his ability to fire Lisa Cook, a Fed governor. Now, the only way that the court could really come to that determination, right, it's not going to be to rule that based on having an independent Fed where the governors serve with 12-year terms and they have employment contracts and that presidents can't really fire them unless there is a legitimate cause, right? Not just because they feel that they have a cause, but there is a demonstrable legitimate cause. And cause generally has to do with something you've done on the job, right? Something, dereliction of duty, right? Not something that was dug up in your past because they went on a fishing expedition looking for dirt, right? And they finally dug something up, and they said, "Aha! You lied on a mortgage application," right? The only way I think that the Supreme Court could approve this is if they actually rule on the independence of the Fed, and they rule that a truly independent Fed is unconstitutional, which I believe it is. I never believed that the Federal Reserve Act would hold up to constitutional scrutiny, but it was never really challenged. But I don't think that the creation of what really amounts to, right, a banking cartel that has a monopoly on issuing these Federal Reserve notes, which are then going to be legal tender, I don't think it's authorized. I mean, the Constitution has 3 branches of government, not 4, right? The Federal Reserve is not a branch of the government, right? You have the judicial branch, you have the executive, and you have the legislative. So if the Fed really exists independent of any oversight, it would effectively be like maybe another branch of government. But there's nothing in the Constitution that authorizes this. So I think the Supreme Court might say, the only way the Fed is constitutional is if it's subject to the oversight of some elected official, like the President of the United States. Now, the President of the United States is allowed to nominate the FOMC members. So why can't he fire them? He gets to pick them. Why can't he get rid of them, right? The court might rule that inherent in that power, the power to nominate is the power to terminate, because there's nothing in the Constitution that says that we should have an independent Fed. And I think the justices might say that would be against the Constitution to have such an entity. So I think what the Supreme Court might do is actually strike down the concept that the Federal Reserve is independent and make it clear that all the FOMC members serve at the pleasure of the president. And the president can fire whoever he wants for whatever cause he believes justifies the firing, because he was elected president. He's got the power. The people trust his judgment. And therefore, if he believes that a FOMC member, for whatever reason, is not fit for the job, then he can remove them. That is the risk, because that will destroy Fed independence. Now, yes, if Trump wants to nominate a replacement FOMC member, the Senate is going to have to approve the nomination. Now, the Senate might, right? The Republicans might, but even if there aren't enough Republicans who want to play ball with what the president is doing, he doesn't need replacement nominees. Even if they're short, they can still convene and rule. So as long as Trump gets rid of enough board members who oppose what he wants to do, so that his guys or gals are in the majority, then even if there aren't enough, so he can fire every single FOMC member until the majority that remains will do what he wants, because the policy is made based on majority vote, right? So if there's only 3 FOMC members left, it's two out of 3 wins, right? So, but this is going to show the world that there is no independent Federal Reserve. And, we've been touting the independence of the Federal Reserve for a long time as this is why you should trust the dollar. This is why you should trust our monetary policy, because the Fed is independent. It's above politics. Right? But if that's not the case, if it's completely political, if the president effectively controls the Fed, meaning that when we elect a new president, we're simultaneously electing a new Fed chairman. In fact, a lot of people have said that the most powerful job in the country is chairman of the Federal Reserve. Well, how can the most powerful position in the government, right, be for an official that's not even authorized by our Constitution? I think it will be very easy for the Supreme Court to declare the whole thing unconstitutional. Now, I don't think they're going to wipe out the Fed completely. I think they're just going to say, in order for the Federal Reserve to be in conformity with the Constitution, it must be accountable to the President of the United States, must be accountable to the Congress. It can't be some independent authority that exists on its own to do whatever it wants, right? I think that is what they're likely to rule. And that's going to send shockwaves throughout the global economy, financial market, because now people are going to realize that, it's going to be debt monetization, right? There is no independent check that's going to force Congress or the president to ever act fiscally responsible. Why should they? Once they control the Fed and they have the printing press, why should they ever cut spending, right? Just print whatever they need. They'll keep interest rates as low as they need. And this is a huge risk that nobody is talking about, the loss of independence. And of course, what I don't expect the Supreme Court to do is recognize why the Fed was independent. Because it's not a government agency. That's the lie. The Federal Reserve is a private banking cartel. The member banks are not owned by the government. They're not part of the government. Even the Federal Open Market Committee, even though they're appointed The members are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. They are appointed to roles outside the government. And once they are appointed, they are not accountable, right? Once you appoint them to their 12-year term, they do whatever the hell they want, right? You can't say, I don't like your decisions. For cause doesn't mean because you don't like, their monetary policy, right? That if you could just get rid of them because you didn't like their monetary policy, there would be no point of a 12-year term. The whole point of a 12-year term is so you can't get rid of them. Now, obviously, if there's a real legitimate reason that has nothing to do with their policy decisions, then yes. And you can't concoct a reason if it's obvious that the reason is you disagree with their policy decisions, and so you go looking for dirt, then that doesn't count, right? Because it's obvious what you're trying to do. You're trying to remove somebody for their policy choices, which you have no authority to do, and you're trying to use this phony, mortgage thing as a way to do it. But again, the reason that the Fed is independent, and this is not something that this court is going to address, is that what the Federal Reserve does, right, issuing paper money, is something that the U.S. government has no constitutional authority to do. That's why it didn't do it. That's why it created the Fed. It created the Fed to do something that it could not do itself. Why? Because the monetary powers of the Federal Reserve are created in Article 1, Section 8. And in Article 1, Section 8, the federal government is given the power to coin money and regulate its value. Coin money. That's it. What does coining money mean? Well, it means taking money and making a coin out of it, right? Not a paper bill, a coin. And what is money? Well, money is defined in the Constitution as gold and silver. How do you know this? Because Article 1, Section 10 says no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin legal tender. Okay? So that's money. Gold and silver coins, that's legal tender. Nothing else. That's all the Constitution. Now, somebody might say, well, that says no state can make anything other than gold and silver. It doesn't say the federal government. It doesn't have to. Because the way the Constitution is written, the federal government can only do what the Constitution authorizes it to do. The states can do whatever they want as long as the Constitution doesn't prohibit it. That's why the Constitution says no state shall coin money or emit bills of credit, right? So states can't make their own money and they can't emit bills of credit. What's a bill of credit? That's paper money, right? So the states are banned from printing paper money. But the federal government is only authorized to coin money. It is not authorized to emit bills of credit. And in fact, the earlier drafts of the Constitution, and you can see this in the Elliott debates, the earliest draft said Congress shall coin money and emit bills of credit. And by a vote of 9-2, they removed emit bills of credit. So it wasn't an oversight. They deliberated allowing the federal government to issue paper money, and then they decided, no way, we don't want to allow it, right? We had a bad experience with the Continental, right? We don't want any paper money. So the Constitution was written to ban paper money, right? So it would never exist, at least not from the government. Now, private banks, they were allowed to emit bills of credit all they wanted, right? Private banks could issue banknotes, and they did issue banknotes. And that's why we ended up getting a central bank, and the Federal Reserve was basically there to rediscount commercial paper issued by other banks. I don't even want to get into all of the rationale behind why people thought having a central bank was a good idea. But the fact of the matter is, it had to be private. It couldn't be part of the government because then it would be unconstitutional. So it had to be this separate thing. Now, in my opinion, the way they went about creating it, I think that's unconstitutional too. And that's what I think the current Supreme Court is going to rule, that this setup, right, of this independent Federal Reserve is unconstitutional and it has to be part of the government. But this is the threat that is looming on the horizon. This is one of the reasons that I am just super bullish on gold and silver and incredibly bearish on the U.S. dollar. The dollar index closed, I think, at 97.7. I think this is the weakest close of the year for the dollar index. Look, it's going a lot lower, but nobody is talking about this yet. They will once the Supreme Court rules, right? But nobody is really talking about it now, other than me. I haven't heard anybody else mentioning the possibility of this happening and why it might happen. And yes, I think the Supreme Court is right that the current Fed as constructed was unconstitutional, but what they are going to create is going to be even more unconstitutional than what they strike down. But they're not going to get that, right? They're not going to go far enough. And so the small right is going to lead to a greater wrong. And that's why you got to load up. So as I said, go to Schiff Gold, buy your gold and silver this weekend. My gold fund, gold stocks doubling on the year. Look, it's still early, I think. They're going to double and double and double again. So nobody's talking about it. I watch the financial markets. They mention gold once in a while, but there's no enthusiasm. They still talk more about Bitcoin than gold, even though Bitcoin is not going up and gold is. And these gold stocks are making nothing but money for the people who bought them. But again, it's still early. So my gold fund, Europe Pacific Gold Fund, EPGIX. Hopefully I got the symbol right that time, but that is the no load version. You could buy that at any discount broker. The Europe Pacific Gold Fund. If you don't have a discount brokerage account, you can call up our advisors, or you can just go directly to the website, europac.com, and you can just buy my fund right off my website. Or you can call up the representatives at Europe Pacific Asset Management and set up a separately managed account where we'll manage a portfolio of gold stocks, but also not just gold stocks, international stocks, foreign stocks. Again, had a much better day today, going up, especially with the weak dollar in the face of a weakening U.S. stock market. The world is divesting of U.S. stocks. The central banks are divesting of U.S. dollars. And this is going to accelerate once the Supreme Court destroys even the pretense of an independent Fed.
Gold and silver have once again captured the spotlight as America teeters on the edge of unprecedented financial and political instability. With Donald Trump's recent surge in polling numbers despite multiple legal challenges, and the U.S. economy walking a tightrope of inflation, rate uncertainty, and record-breaking debt levels, it has become abundantly clear that the fiat system, rooted in endless money printing and blind trust, is broken. Gold and silver are not just alternative investments anymore. They are lifeboats in a storm of economic and institutional collapse. Every fiat currency in history has eventually failed. The US dollar, once backed by gold, now floats on the whims of policymakers and central bankers. The Federal Reserve claims to fight inflation, yet it created the very problem with years of near-zero interest rates and trillions in stimulus. And now, with CPI inflation numbers still sticky and consumer sentiment in freefall, they've cornered themselves into a lose-lose situation. Raise rates and tank the economy, or ease and ignite another inflation wave. Either way, fiat suffers, but physical gold and silver, finite, real, and time-tested, thrive. In the last few weeks, silver has quietly outperformed many other assets, pushing past key resistance levels while being largely ignored by the mainstream media. Gold, too, is testing all-time highs amid global central bank accumulation. Why are nations like China, Russia, and even Poland buying tons of gold while telling their citizens to hold cash? Because they know what's coming. They know the dollar is losing its dominance and that the next financial system won't be built on paper IOUs. It will be anchored to something real. Trump's return to the headlines isn't just about politics. It's about economic sentiment. His recent statements slamming the Federal Reserve and calling for a return to sound money are echoing louder than ever. Trump understands that Americans are losing faith in the institutions that manage their money. Confidence in the Fed is near all-time lows. The Treasury is issuing debt at a breakneck pace. Social Security is on track to go bankrupt. Meanwhile, the stock market continues to float on speculation, artificially supported by Fed jawboning and tech hype. But beneath the surface, cracks are forming, young investors are waking up. They're beginning to see the trap. Save in dollars, and you're guaranteed to lose purchasing power. Trust in stocks and crypto, and you're subject to manipulation and regulatory whims. The only assets with a 5,000-year track record of preserving wealth through every war, recession, and regime change are gold and silver. And right now, silver is arguably the most undervalued strategic asset on Earth. Not only is it a monetary metal, but it's also essential in solar panels, electric vehicles, and industrial applications. The supply is shrinking while demand is surging. This is not a speculative narrative. It's a supply chain reality. Meanwhile, America is sleepwalking into another debt crisis. With over $34 trillion in national debt and interest payments now rivaling military spending, the writing is on the wall. The government has no plan to pay it off. The only tool they have left is inflation. Silent theft through currency debasement. If you're holding dollars, you're the victim. Every printed dollar makes your savings weaker. Every stimulus check, every bailout, every new government program funded by the printing press, it's a transfer of your wealth to the state. Look at the banks. Regional banking stress has returned, and big names are warning of a new wave of collapses. If even one major institution falls, a domino effect could ensue. And with FDIC reserves under pressure and trust in banks declining, people are beginning to ask serious questions. What happens to my savings if the system locks up? If you can't hold it, you don't own it, and that's why physical metals are making a comeback. Gold and silver require no counterparty. They cannot be hacked, frozen, or inflated away. They don't rely on government promises or Wall Street gymnastics. In times of war, regime change, or collapse, like the world is inching toward now, they are the final fallback. Just this week, Trump warned that America is closer than ever to losing the dollar as the world reserve currency. That's not alarmism, it's fact. The BRICS nations are actively developing a gold-backed trading currency, and the world is watching. The petrodollar era is ending, and with it, the dollar's dominance. Gold and silver will outlive fiat. They have outlived every empire that thought it could print its way to prosperity, and they will outlive this one too. While Wall Street distracts you with AI stocks and debt-fueled bubbles, the smart money is quietly accumulating hard assets. If the monetary system resets, and history shows it always does, those holding metals will have purchasing power while everyone else scrambles for crumbs.